6. This is the last unit. Modernism was the name of the game for this last unit. We're looking at the turn of the century and the 20th century. We had seen it hinted at with the late Romanticism. Everyone was trying to break the rules, break from the norms and traditions. We see that continuing, especially in art. You're going to see this to make art more modern, more visionary, progressive, a lot of departures from the tradition. And so there's a lot of different styles presented under the big term modernism. But the main idea is that they rejected 19th century models and with it carried a suspicion of anything that was mass culture. So if it was popular, they wanted to stay away from it. If it was traditional, they wanted to stay away. Early modernist art you can see in Futurism and Dadaism. And here's a couple of pictures to give you an idea of some of this modernism movement. Other styles, Cubism, Expressionism, both of these had impacts on music, but particularly Expressionism did. I want you to be familiar with the phrase avant-garde, which is a phrase meaning cutting edge or outside the norms, breaking traditions. And this was distinguished from high culture and mass market taste. So avant-garde was something very different. American musicals went through some major developments and transformations that became very popular. Minstrel shows gave way to vaudeville. We're not going to go too much into that, but New York City became kind of the home of music publishing. There was an area called Tin Pan Alley, which was a street in Manhattan. And a lot of the writers and publishers set up business there. And some of the most famous compositions from that time came from Tin Pan Alley. Irving Berlin was a really successful composer there. This is an idea of surrealism in paint. Music obviously was affected with the Great Depression and World Wars, World War II particularly. In the Roaring Twenties, right before the Great Depression, there was a growth in radio and in film, and there was the birth of jazz with its broadening spread to even ballrooms. So it became even for the elite as well. People could not stop the spread of jazz, even though some people thought it was vulgar. The Great Depression brought with it more of those jazz clubs. Broadway got popular. People were looking for anything to escape their reality. And jazz gave way to more big band style jazz or swing, and that was what was really popular during that time period. Musicians began to tour during World War II, and patriotic music got very popular, particularly Berlin's God Bless America. In music, you're going to see non-symmetrical patterns in rhythm, changing meter, polyrhythms, influence of Asian and African rhythms, and you'll see and hear that even in ragtime and jazz, really distinct rhythms in that. New melodies and harmonies were challenging because melodies weren't smooth and lyrical anymore. They were rejecting balanced phrases, preferring more dissonance, more wider leaps. Harmony had more dissonance and more tension. Polyharmonies, polychords, these are all the idea of just breaking the rules, breaking out of norms, creating things that were not necessarily beautiful, but art nonetheless. Orchestras got a little smaller and leaner, and instrumental colors were brought out by the use of counterpoint. Attention was more placed on woodwinds than strings, and definitely an emphasis in percussion. The piano joined the orchestra as a staple. And technological advances helped to provide inspiration as well. The important thing here to note is that there was a division in musicians. Some people wanted to preserve the tradition, and then some were very much in favor of this avant-garde. So not all composers were interested in avant-garde approaches, but some really wanted to be still in the style of Mozart, Brahms, Beethoven, etc. So we kind of have a division in what was popular, and even some composers wanting to incorporate jazz into their their classical compositions. Some would have felt that would have been a no-no because that was way too casual and vulgar, as I mentioned before. And others thought it was fantastic and wanted to utilize some of the new sounds in there. So you really have all sorts of things happening during this 20th century.